Hello, welcome to another episode of the Intel with Greg Cosell. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan, and with us, of course, is Greg Cosell. He's a senior producer at NFL Films, host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, and of course, a panelist every game day on Inside the Birds pregame live. And today, Greg, this is the much anticipated cornerbacks episode. We've got a lot of great cornerbacks available for the NFL draft that we want to get into with you. I'd like to start with sort of a broad question because the last few years, the league has seen some really good, used to be a position where it was hard to find good rookies. First year guys integrate to the NFL. Last year, you saw Sauce Gardner. I think he was all pro as a rookie.
Yeah.
Patrick Surtain, Tariq Woolen. You've seen some guys over the last few years really sort of just anchor in as rookies. When you look at this year's overall class, do you see a strong class, a deep class, an immediate impact kind of guy, or not as much? How do you view it?
I think it's a pretty good class, and I'm sure Adam's spoken to people. I think it's a pretty solid class. Keep in mind the way that college football has changed, the way football in general has changed, starting out as a young age with passing league 7-on-7. The corner position has really increased in importance. And now you see kids, if they play corner starting at a young age, they're playing against a lot of passing, and that goes right through college. Years and years ago, it was pretty much known that unless you drafted a corner in the first or second round, you were not likely getting a starting quality player. I think that's changed to some degree. Normally, and I'm sure that it hasn't been 100%, but over the last number of years, the two positions with the most players drafted are wide receiver and corner. And I think that kind of speaks to where the league is. So you get a lot of corners now with a lot of experience at a young age, getting an opportunity to defend a lot of passes beginning when they start playing football. Sure. So, I think, and in fact, there's a lot of people who believe that if you, let's say, want to be a wide receiver and you're not going to be a really good one for whatever reason, that you should play corner because you have a better chance of playing, as you keep moving along with each step, you have a better chance of playing if you're a corner than if you're just, let's say, going to be an average wide receiver.
Did Tariq Woolen, was he a guy who changed positions?
Yes, he went to school as a wide receiver and played corner only his last 2 seasons at UTSA, and obviously had an outstanding rookie season.
There you go.
Hey, Greg, one more question on this. There are a couple of positions in the NFL where traits are great, but also maybe not essential. You can be a pretty good player without traits. When you evaluate corners and you see the success rate of corners in the NFL, how important is the marriage of traits to the position?
I would argue corner is a position of traits. I don't want to say more than any other, but it's a position of traits.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
Yeah. You rarely, in fact, we were just having this conversation in the matchup office here, that you rarely see, like you think of receivers, okay? You can look at a Cole Beasley. Okay, Cole Beasley played in the league for quite a while, had success. You're not going to see a lot of 5'8" corners who don't run well.
Right.
It's a position of traits. And normally the traits dictate where you play. We'll get into one or two corners today in our discussion where that will come into play. But rarely do you see corners that don't have athletic traits, physical traits. Hey, you mentioned, Geoff, Tariq Woolen. Tariq Woolen was Adam, a 4th or 5th round pick? Do you recall?
5th, I think. Yeah, I think 5th.
But I mean, 6'4", 215. If memory serves me correctly, he ran a 4.28 or a 4.26 40.
Wow.
But people, because of where he played, UTSA, and because he'd only played corner for 2 years, didn't view him as a top 40 pick. But hey, the traits were there, and he comes into the league, starts right away, and obviously you could argue after Sauce Gardner, he was the best rookie corner in the league. So, I think to me, when I watch tape, is it all traits 100%? Of course not. No position is just 100% traits, or we'd make it a beauty contest. But I think ultimately traits at the corner position are extremely important.
So, Greg, I know you don't rank corners, but when you look at the top guys.
I don't do it. I don't make a list, but I mean, in my mind, I have guys that, like I have a guy I think's the #1 corner in this draft.
He'll be one of the top 2 guys we mentioned here, but guy that I heard throughout the fall is Devon Witherspoon from Illinois. Tell us about him.
Now, it's funny because he would not be my number one corner.
Okay.
And I think he's a solid corner prospect. I think the question with Witherspoon is whether teams would see him as an outside corner or as a slot corner. And I think that is a question that, to me, that's a legitimate question. He played a lot in the slot, much more so than people might think. But he did play he played predominantly on the outside, but there were significant snaps in the slot, over 200 this past year. He's got a 180-pound frame. So it would not surprise me if some teams and defensive coordinators saw him as a better fit in the slot. But what he definitely has quick, sudden, explosive feet. He plays aggressively. He plays decisively. He's a super high-level competitor. He plays with swagger. He's one of those corners that's a pain in the ass in a good way. He's got a really high level of competitive toughness. But there's a couple of things that, struck me. Now, he did not run at the combine. Did he have a pro day yet, or was he injured? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But, I thought too many receivers got on top of him on vertical routes. And again, that's one reason you have to watch full games, because there were times that happened where the ball was not thrown. So it did not turn out to be a big play for the offense, but the receiver still got on top of him. And in off coverage, he tended to be a little slow and sluggish in his transition to flip his hips and open up to match and carry verticals. So that's just something I noticed on film. Where he really excelled playing off coverage was playing routes in front of him. He's really explosive with his plant and drive. He impacts both the receiver and the throw. He's the kind of guy, the more you watch him, the more you like him because of the way in which he played. He is super feisty, super competitive. Coaches will love him, I'm sure, just for that reason. But I think it's a legitimate question as to whether you view him as an outside corner or a slot corner based on the fact that, he's 180 pounds. Now, it's not that he's really short. He's 5'11 and a half. You can play outside corner at 5'11 and a half. But I'm just real curious as to how teams see him.
Did have Illinois had their pro day on March 10th. He did not participate as he's been nursing a hamstring injury.
There you go.
He will have a private workout in Champaign, Illinois on April 5th.
Okay, well, if it's a hamstring, you don't know, how that heals. But I know I talked to a scout who indicated that they are a little concerned about his the 40 time, because it does relate to vertical speed and the ability to run with verticals.
Let me ask you, I know sometimes, Greg, you will go back a year to watch tape to answer any lingering questions you may have. Did you do that with Devon Witherspoon at all? Because some of the feedback I've gotten, and this is for every position, scouts sort of don't like when they only see a guy have a great year for 1 year, because Witherspoon, I don't think at this time last year was considered one of the better corners in college football. So I don't want to call him a 1-year wonder, but scouts sort of get a little bristly at the idea of a guy who just has a great last final year of college.
And sometimes I do that, Geoff. I did not with Witherspoon. I watched, I think, 6 games and felt that, that was a good sample. I mean, I saw the traits. He played multiple schemes at Illinois. He played both to the field and to the boundary. There were times I thought his feet were piston-like. He's got suddenness. He's got twitch to him. As I said, he's really decisive in everything he does. He's an aggressive player. He's super feisty. I mean, he's tenacious. As I mentioned, he's got swagger. He's a good prospect. Don't get me wrong. It's just I kept thinking to myself, is he a slot or is he an outside corner at the next level? And I just don't know the answer to that.
Okay. So the next corner we'll ask you, and this might be, I have a feeling this guy will be the guy you say is your number one corner, and that would be Christian Gonzalez from Oregon.
And he would be my number one corner.
All right, tell us why.
First of all, this guy's over 6'1". His measurables were phenomenal at the combine. He is just smooth as silk. And he played both inside and outside, by the way, at Oregon. Meaningful snaps inside. But to me, he's really more of an outside corner. And I think that his overall traits are really, really strong. You could line this guy up as your boundary corner, and he could match any boundary X receiver in the league. He's really fluid. He's smooth. He's got loose hips, quick feet, easily changes direction. He plays press really well, both mirror match press man, where you don't put your hands on the receiver, and physical press man. He's got strong, active hands to disrupt routes off the line of scrimmage. There were snaps at Oregon against pretty much every team that I watched him against. And again, I watched 6 or 7 games where he literally just drove the receiver out of bounds, removing him as an option for the quarterback. Now, in the NFL, that's hard to do because obviously after 5 yards, you can't do that. But the point is the rules allow you to do that in college, and he did it. He was physical. He just shoved receivers right out of bounds. And even in mirror match, where he didn't put his hands on them, he was so good with his movement that he squeezed receivers to the sideline, taking away their space. He can plant and burst going downhill. I just think that this guy, to me, there was no other corner in this draft who had his combination of size, length, speed, fluidity, and competitiveness. And it would not surprise me if he was the first corner off the board. I mean, I think he's a really good prospect.
Adam, did you get any? I got some sort of, I'll go through it in a second. The feedback I got on him from some scouts I thought was interesting. I'm just curious if you had heard anything about him as far as the interview process or anything like that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, not yet.
The only thing I wouldn't say this if I didn't get it from at least 3 people, is that when he interviewed at the combine, he was described to me by, again, 3 different people, different viewpoints of just a little bit more timid and kind of his demeanor was a little bit more, I guess, I don't know what the word they use. I don't remember, like, I guess passive for someone that you want to be your number 1 corner. They want you to have that, what Nick Sirianni calls that dog mentality, that swagger that Greg was talking about with Witherspoon. No, that's why I think they made that point to me, is because what you see on tape is a guy who plays with it, but the way he interviewed was just seemingly a little bit more passive than they expected.
Yeah, and it's funny because I know someone who interviewed him and said that he came across as incredibly intelligent, really smart kid, very self-aware. So, you could, as we all know, and Geoff, I'm not saying what you look, we're talking about what other people are saying, but we all know that you could talk to 10 guys who interviewed a kid and you get 10 different answers.
Exactly.
Rarely do you get the same answer. I mean, there's always a few kids you get the same answer. Usually that's when the kid's a jerk. You get the same answer.
Sure. When it's very
right,
obvious.
Adam? I mean, we know that from through the years. If a guy's, a jerk, you pretty much get the same answer.
Right.
But just very quickly, it reminds me of when Justin Herbert came out. And a lot of people talked about the fact that, he grew up in Eugene. He could walk to the campus. Yeah. He doesn't have a lot of worldly experience. And I heard someone say, so I don't want people to think I'm the one who said this, but because I heard someone say, do people think you have to grow up on the mean streets of Chicago to play quarterback in the NFL? Right. Different people have different points of view about the interview process, which, of course, the 3 of us, we don't get to do that. We just get to talk to people who do that.
Right. Yeah. By the way, I did also, intelligence was a big thing that I did hear, that you could tell he's a smart guy, intelligent guy. They just, again, there was.
Well, I just loved his tape. I loved his tape. And I think, all the measurables measure up to and to me, he was the best corner prospect. Although there's another guy that I think is really interesting as well.
All right. Why don't we move on to, go ahead.
I'm just going to add that sometimes when these interviews are done, they're late at night, and these kids sometimes are exhausted.
Sure.
Yeah. Sometimes they just don't have the energy, because if he does 5 interviews from 11 p to 12 a at night, he could be exhausted. You just never know what the energy is for these kids.
I believe it. And like we say, usually
teams are looking at by that time.
Yeah,
I'm asleep by then. I've already had my milk and cookies. I'm sleeping.
Right. You're done by then. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to the other corner that you felt you were just about to mention as really, really good prospect.
I really liked the tape of Deonte Banks from Maryland.
Okay.
Another 6 feet, 197, really impressive measurables. Again, size, length, athleticism, man coverage traits. They played Ohio State, so I watched that game really carefully. He had some great matchup plays with Marvin Harrison. And of course, with Ohio State, you get all five-star receivers anyway, but he had some great matchups versus Marvin Harrison. Banks won some, Harrison won some. That's what you would expect. Two really good players who are going to play on Sundays. But I like Banks' tape a lot. He's got the length. He's got the loose, easy transition fluidity that you look for. He can play mirror match press man at a high level. That's kind of his thing. I think he's got the recognition and understanding to play multiple zone coverage concepts, so he's scheme versatile. I really think he's a higher level outside corner prospect. I think he's got a complete skill set, and he's athletic. He's competitive. Nowadays you've got to be able to line up and play man coverage. He can line up and play man coverage. And, he's another guy that, I don't know how much he was talked about before the combine, but obviously, Adam, you can speak to this better, but he blew up the combine. So everybody started to take note. I actually watched his tape after the combine, but was very, very impressed with his tape.
Yeah, I was going to say that with Banks, he had among the best vertical jumps and broad jumps, and he's super long.
Yep.
He's what you want ideally in size. Arm length, speed, his 40 time was one of the best. So
and his 10-yard split was really good, by the way, for a guy that is long, because he's 6 feet 197.
Was he a 4-year starter, 3-year starter? Do you know offhand?
Yes. I mean, he had 8 starts as a true freshman. And he got hurt in 2021. So but he's been a starter basically all 4 years.
Good.
Maryland is a strange school. For a team that does not have a great football program, they have a habit of putting some pretty good players in the NFL, some really athletic players too. Guys like Stephon Diggs and DJ Moore. He goes back to Sean Merriman and who's the tight end? Vernon Davis? Didn't he go to Maryland?
Yeah, he went to Maryland as well. And actually, I think
those guys are always workout warriors. They're always like,
they had a pretty good season
up
this year too. If I'm not mistaken, Geoff, you may know because it's Big Ten. I think they were 8-5. I think they had.
They were actually fairly. They're not terrible. They're one of those teams that they're up and down a little bit. They're never great, but sometimes they're good. I think Tua's brother was their quarterback.
Yeah, and they always have some bad losses where you go, oh my God, how did that happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk.
But I really like Deonte Banks. I think he's another really good prospect, and that's the key word here, prospect. He had some really good matchups too against Rashee Rice, the SMU corner, because wide receiver, because they played SMU. In fact, in the second half of that game, they moved Banks to match up to Rice in the entire second half. And you had some good matchups there. So, Banks is matched up to some quality wide receivers. And as I said, he's got the traits you look for.
Next guy I want to ask you about is very fascinating because of his size, Greg. It's Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State. Very, very light. We talked about Witherspoon and his sort of lack of height, but Forbes is what? Is he under 200? I think he's like 160.
Forbes under 200. God,
I mean, way under 200. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's almost 6'1", and he was 166 at the combine.
Wow, Deshaun Jackson-esque right there.
Now his other measurables are great, but he's a tough evaluation because that makes him an exception. I can't recall corners under 170 pounds getting drafted, and certainly getting drafted the way he's being spoken about right now, as a first and certainly second round pick. You'd be hard pressed to find a first or second round corner in recent or even historical memory with that kind of weight deficiency. He is thin. But there's no question, because he's 6'1", that he's got length, he's smooth, he's fluid. He played a ton of zone. He played a lot of off coverage. But he's got loose hips. He's got the long speed. He ran a 4.35. He can run, and he's got stride length because of his 6'1" frame. He's really good in zone coverage. Great understanding, great awareness. Played with his eyes really, really well. Understood the gray areas that are a part of zone coverage and how to sort of squeeze those areas. Had a great feel for spacing. And his ball production has been really, really good. When he gets his hands on the ball, he catches it. Now there are some that were just bad throws. So, I'm not going to sit here and say, wow, he just shut down receivers. Some are bad throws that went to him, but he caught it. You know, and there are a lot of coaches that value that, you know, that value the fact that, hey, we want ball production. We don't just want you to cover people. We want to take the ball away. So the question is, his rail thin frame, that makes, to me, his evaluation and projection a little polarizing. You know, I guess the question would be this, guys: is his length and higher level athleticism and savvy enough to compensate for his frame? That's a tough decision. I mean, I think it's a tough decision.
I'm with you. He's playing in the SEC, so he's obviously playing the highest caliber of football against Georgia and Alabama and teams that are known for being physical. Has he been durable throughout his career?
Forbes, let's see, played 3 years at Mississippi State, starting 34 games. So yes, he has not missed games.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, the evidence sort of suggests he should be able to hold up, but I do agree that this would be a historical anomaly. As it, and by the way, the people I've spoke to love his tape, just like you do. So
I mean, what you see with him, Geoff, is the zone element, which you don't see that often from college corners. You know, he has a great feel for playing with his eyes. As I said, he understands spacing. He understands the areas and zones where there are voids, so that, you know, because every zone has voids.
Right.
He's really, really good in that regard. He's a good football player, and he's not timid. I mean, he's willing and competitive as a tackler on the outside, despite his thin frame. It's not like he's a timid player.
Right.
It's just he's rail thin, you know. But hey, we have a rail thin guy in Philly who's done okay as a wide receiver. So, you know, you never know with these guys. I mean, that's why, you know, it's a tough decision. You know, how do you view the 166 pounds? But it will be a conversation in draft meetings, as you guys well know.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Let's stay down south. Let's talk about Cam Smith from South Carolina.
Yeah, Cam Smith is he's a guy I did as well. They actually have two corners, but Cam Smith is the better one. Cam Smith is he's 6'1", but he's thin at 180. Pretty good combine as far as measurables, actually very good combine as far as measurables. You know, another guy that has athletic and physical traits. He's got really good length because, like I said, he's 6'1". He's kind of twitchy. You know, then you add his extensive experience playing both outside and in the slot, which he did a ton this year. I mean, he played almost 200 snaps in the slot this past year at South Carolina. So he's got that inside-outside flexibility that has tremendous value in the NFL. Really quick feet, fluid hips, can transition and change direction really well. I would say he was at his best playing mirror match press man coverage, stayed connected to the receiver throughout the route, but also showed the ability in off coverage to plant and drive. I liked him. I liked his tape. He grew on me. The more I watched him, the more I liked him. You know, with that length at 6'1", I can't see him getting beyond, you know, pick 40, pick 45. You know, corners with this kind of height and length and measurables normally don't get past, you know, 40, 45. I mean, he ran a 4.43 with a great 10-yard split. He's got arm length. His vertical was 38. Guys like that don't normally at corner get beyond pick 40, 45.
Did you, in watching him, feel like he excelled in the slot more than outside, or vice versa at all?
No, I didn't necessarily, you know, take note of that in that sense, so I can't answer that.
Okay.
I would say that he was probably better in press than he was in off. That's what I would say.
Okay.
I thought that at times he got stuck in off coverage with his feet not in good position, and so therefore he was a little sticky trying to transition and change direction when he was in off coverage. You see that a lot with corners. They're more comfortable in press just because it's, you know, you can be up on a guy and really you can stay connected to him right off the ball. No, but I didn't necessarily take note, and maybe I should have, of where he was better. But I think at 6'1", Geoff, my guess is he'll be seen as an outside corner initially.
Yeah, that makes sense. We used to say that, by the way, about Ronald Darby a lot. Better in press man than off. That was a big thing with him when he was with the Eagles. All right, next guy we're going to ask you about. Now, I was hoping Adam would ask about him. You know, we've gone through 8 guys already, because if I do it, it looks like, you know, there's some bias or homerism here, but we can't go any further without asking about Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State, who is, I mean, there are some people I speak to who think he's going to be a high first round pick, and some not so convinced.
Yeah, he's another guy. I mean, you're starting to get a lot of big corners because you have big receivers. He's 6'2.5". He's big, he's long. His issues stem from the fact that he's really, really handsy and aggressive. And he's grabby when, early in the route, which is okay, but through the route, and he has to clean that up. Sometimes that's not so easy to clean up because guys have been doing it their whole career. But this guy, he is a physical player. I mean, he's got size, length. His arm length is ridiculous for a corner. It's 34 inches. That's offensive line arm length. So he's got 34-inch arms, which is
almost
crazy.
like he's the son of an NFL linebacker, Greg.
Plays physical, and I think, an NFL linebacker who was a little different cat, by the way.
Yes, definitely.
But his, this guy is a press man corner. Okay, he can line up and play boundary corner. He is a mirror match press man corner and a physical press man corner. I mean, he's got the strength and physical mindset to disrupt receivers off the line of scrimmage. He's a physical guy. That's the strength of his game. He's much better at press than he is off the ball because he's kind of, I don't want to say he's stiff, but he plays a little upright. And that when you're playing off coverage, that shows up more.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if he'll make it there, but he sounds like a New England Patriot. Tough, physical, outside corner, can get up on you. I don't know.
Yep.
That just reminds me of a Bill Belichick type of guy. But
he's got great play strength. I mean, he's very physical player when he plays press. That's his game.
Right.
But by the way, his 10-yard split was pretty good. So, he is a good athlete. I'm not sure you describe him as truly twitchy, but he's definitely got higher level athletic traits, and 6'2.5" and physical.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really interesting prospect. I would imagine he'll go high as well.
And staying with that theme of guys with good size, how about Tyreek Stevenson of Miami?
He was, he had some issues, okay, as a lot of guys do. I mean, hardly anybody comes in the league and you say, wow, that guy's got nothing wrong with him. This kid's another guy that's, he's over 6 feet. He's close to 200 pounds. Now, he's another guy with a physical, competitive nature to his game. He's got all the traits you want to play press man. He's got long arms. He's got play strength. He plays that way. I would think that he needs some work because he had some balance issues in press man when he reacted to receivers' releases. Sometimes he just kind of lost his balance or he got back on his heels. And despite running a pretty good 40 time, I thought his recovery burst and acceleration and speed when he had to deal with the vertical routes was not what you'd expect it to be given his time speed. He got beat over the top at times. So, he's got some things to clean up, but he's another guy that can play press, wants to play press, wants to be physical. And these guys, again, you're dealing, as we all know, everybody would like, longer athletes than shorter athletes. And, he's over 6 feet and he's very physical.
So that is 7 guys we've asked you about, Greg. And I believe almost every single one of them is at least 6 feet.
Yeah.
Unless I'm wrong. Okay. Almost every single one.
Well, yeah, we had Stevenson, right? And that's it. Was it not Stevenson? We had Witherspoon. Was he the only one who was under?
Yeah, Witherspoon might be the only one, but we already know about it. So based on your knowledge, you've been studying the draft long. I know you don't rank players and things like that or play GM, but you made this point before. Usually when you're of a certain size and your tape says you're of a certain player, you're a top 50 at that position. You're usually a top 50 guy as is. So does this sound right? Like maybe 7 corners and we have a couple more left, that 7 or 8 corners, top 50, you think?
Could, for sure. It's a real, I mean, think about the league, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody says it's a quarterback league. Okay, so what does that mean? It's a passing league. Now you got to defend the pass. So what do you have to do to defend the pass? You got to rush the quarterback, and you have to have corners. I mean, it's not really a complex equation there. So corners are really important in the NFL. I mean, if you look at recent drafts, corners get taken because you never have enough corners. That's just the reality of life in the NFL. I mean, corners, you never have enough, and corners will be taken. And for all we know, you always hear in every draft, Geoff, and you made a great point about this just now, is you always hear about, hey, there's a run on a position. You could see a run on corners because teams who, it's not a matter of needing corners, it's the fact that you never have enough. If someone gets hurt, I mean, look at the Eagles. Okay, we know they have Bradbury and Slay. They signed Greedy Williams. He's kind of an unknown right now just because of his injuries and other factors. Obviously, it's a one-year deal. So, but, think about last year. They were fortunate enough with Slay and Bradbury, but who was going to play if Slay and Bradbury, had to miss meaningful time in a big game?
Right.
I think we all agree that they probably didn't feel like they had a guy they could line up on the outside and really play there.
Yep. And this is what Adam and I have talked about. Now is still a good time to get a corner because just like they did in the 2000s, going from Bobby and Troy, right, Toledo and Sheldon, you want to have those built-in contingency plans in place, not wait until those guys go and then have to draft one.
No, I mean, we're all excited in Philly, of course, that they re-signed Slay and Bradbury, but both of those guys are over 30. And you never know when an injury crops up, when guys get over 30, you never know if a guy's played, declines. So, you don't want to get stuck. Right. The Eagles could easily be looking for a corner in the first round, second round for sure. They need to replenish that position because, you don't want to live a long time with corners who are over 30.
And plus, Greg, for matchup purposes, if a team's going 4 wide, how do you match it up?
Right. You don't want to get stuck saying, okay, well, you become predictable. Well, we have to play zone because of what the offense is showing us. You don't want to become predictable in that way.
Yeah.
Right. So a cornerback who is not 6 foot is Garrett Williams from Syracuse. I think he's around 5'10", 190. What do you see from him?
Yeah, he got hurt this year and only played a certain number of games. I think he got hurt in the Notre Dame game. Yeah, he's 5'10" and 3/8, 192. Obviously didn't do anything because he tore his ACL. This guy, though, he's a really good prospect. I mean, I talked to someone who said that he could have been a late first round pick if he didn't get hurt, because this kid is, as soon as you put on the tape, Geoff, this kid is twitchy and sudden, and you can see it right away in the way he moves. There's a lot of corners that are smooth and fluid, and you just see it in the way they kind of glide, but they're not twitchy. It's hard to explain. You almost have to see it, but when you see it and you know it. This kid is sudden and twitchy, piston-like feet, really loose and fluid, played a ton of off coverage. Okay, now this guy, he does have press man traits. You could see it when they did play press man, but they didn't do that very much. So he has a ton of experience playing off coverage. He was a guy that fascinated me because of how twitchy and sudden he was in his movement. And it just jumped off the film. But again, he played 7 games in 2022, tearing his ACL in the Notre Dame game in late October. So you're not going to see any 40 times or anything like that. Yeah. But he did start his final 3 seasons at Syracuse. He's another guy who's a really good prospect, and it's a good corner class.
So Greg, there are a couple guys that we want to talk about that we haven't heard much about. One of them would be Julius Brents from Kansas State.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on him?
Speaking of tall corners.
Yeah.
Again, we're right back into that conversation. Julius Brents is 6'3", 198. Okay. Wow. Now, he's not quite at the same level of some of these other guys that we've spoken about. He's long, he's rangy. Again, arm length. For those who view that as a big factor, 34-inch arms. I mean,
it's unheard of.
Think about that. That's 2 inches longer. Who's a tall corner of recent vintage that was a great player? Richard Sherman. 6'3", right?
Yeah.
Brent's arm length is 2 inches more than Richard Sherman's. Okay.
Hey, by the way, Brent's arms are longer than Andre Dillard's. What that?
Oh my God.
I know. So,
Crazy.
you know, so therefore his overall length, 6'3", long arms, that often allows players who are not necessarily twitchy, because he's certainly not, allows you to be effective both in mirror match press man and physical press man because of that arm length. Played a good percentage of zone, thought he understood route concepts and combinations, navigating the gray areas in the coverage. Like I said, you wouldn't say he's sudden, you wouldn't say he's twitchy. There were times I thought that he was a little slow in his movement, lost contact with the receiver at the top of the route stem. That's a concern for sure. That's why he's not up there with the top corners. In the NFL, if you start losing contact with receivers at the top of the route stem, you get beat. So that's going to have to be cleaned up. And if it doesn't get cleaned up, he won't be a really good NFL corner, despite some really other good traits. And he doesn't have pure speed, but length sometimes can compensate for that because he is 6'3". Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But that size is always coveted. And when you're a 6'3" corner, then people look at you and think, hey, you can fit in what we do. So that kind of size is coveted.
And his vert and broad jumps are phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, and that does matter for scouts. There's no question.
Without question. 41.5 vert, 11.6 broad, which is really, really good.
Wow. Also, must be great to be able to scratch your knees without bending at the waist. That's a really underrated trait to be able to do.
I
wouldn't know.
I
wouldn't know either,
Well,
but it must be nice.
Greg did, but wait, Greg, when you were a hooper, when you were 6'4", you're probably 6'2" now.
That is a fair statement. I was 6'4", but I ain't 6'4" anymore.
Yes, but you now didn't you tell us you could dunk back in the day?
I could dunk back in the day, but that was back before they had like indoor plumbing, Adam.
So the peach basket, then you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. They didn't have nets. They had the peach basket back then.
That's great.
Thank you, Dr. Naismith. Anyway.
By the way, Greg, you are
he's a good friend of mine. Yeah,
you are a great sport about the old age joke. I got to tell you, you hang with him really well.
He's used to it now.
Hey, that's what it is. I can't. Hey.
Yeah, it's fact of life.
Better talking to you guys than the alternative.
Oh, jeez. Anyway,
you want to talk about Kelee Ringo? Is it Kelee or Kelee? Kelee, from Georgia.
I'm not sure. But we can certainly talk about
we'll
him.
Find that
Let's
out.
talk about Ringo, the star from Georgia.
Another tall guy, by the way.
Exactly.
Man, this guy's 6'2". This guy's
grew him
built
tall this year.
What's that?
They grew him tall this year. It's crazy.
Now, this guy, I don't know if you guys know this, but he was a big-time 5-star recruit out of Arizona. He was the #1 cornerback prospect in the nation when he came out of high school, and a top 20 recruit overall, regardless of position. So this guy, was a big time recruit. So he's got size, he's got athleticism. He ran really well. I don't know if he always plays that way. He's a little tight-hipped. He's straight line linear in his movement, which negatively impacts his transition and direction change. But, he's a physical player. He's got a forceful, competitive demeanor. Again, the size will get people excited. So, he's got extensive experience, obviously, at Georgia, playing both man and zone, playing both off and press. I think the more tape you watch, the more I felt anyway that he was more comfortable playing press and then disrupting the receiver off the line of scrimmage. As I said, he didn't consistently play to his time speed, which was 4.36 in the 40 at the combine. Too many snaps where receivers ran by him and got on top of him. I thought he had some issues with eye discipline in zone, where eyes would be in the wrong place and he'd kind of lose contact with the play. Thought he needed to get better at the moment of truth. There were reps where he had good position, but did not locate the ball the way you need to. So there are some issues that the tape shows with Ringo. But again, he's built like a brick, what, and he's 6'2", 207. I mean, he's a really solid guy.
Interesting. Good stuff there.
One more. Clark Phillips. I know he's smaller. Clark Phillips from Utah.
Yeah, he's 5'9", 184. Now, to me, I think he's a slot corner. He played outside at Utah. He's got, here's a great conversation, which will be had, by the way. His arm length is 29 and an eighth. And remember last year they had the huge discussion about Roger McCreary coming out of Auburn, and his arm length was 28 and 7/8. And everybody said, well, no one gets drafted with arm length at corner under 29 inches. And here's Clark Phillips at 29 and an eighth. But he's got great hands. He's got unbelievable ball production. I think he was at his best on the outside playing off coverage, reading what we call the triangle, meaning reading the receiver through to the quarterback. And then he had great explosiveness playing the route while feeling the quarterback's drop. I mean, really, really good at that. I mean, he was explosive with his plan and drive. I mean, he had twitch and suddenness to his movement. He also played snaps of press man. A lot of snaps in the slot. I mean, I think that at 5'9", 184, he's going to be a slot corner. And he played a lot of slot corner at Utah this past season. But he's a really, really good player. He tracks the ball like a receiver. I mean, he made interceptions where it looked like he was the receiver. And he's really, really savvy and smart in zone coverage, understands receiver splits, understands route concepts. He's a real smart, savvy, aggressive player. He's just 5'9".
Interesting. Where did McCreary wind up playing most of his snaps this as a rookie, by the way?
In the slot.
He was in the slot.
But he did play outside at times, but as the year progressed in Tennessee due to injury, and I don't know if he would have stayed in the slot, but he ended up playing in the slot because I think they went into the season with Molden as their slot corner, but he got hurt a lot, as you guys may recall.
Yes.
I know the Eagles play Tennessee this year. Although he did play outside because Devonta Smith beat him for a touchdown, I believe, on the first series of the game. It might have been first or second series of the game on a post route where McCreary was playing outside at right corner.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a little Auburn, Alabama versus Auburn crime there. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting that they had both McCreary and Molden. And I remember Molden coming out of Washington, definitely projecting as a slot guy, and they took McCreary anyway. So it'd be interesting to see their future plans.
Yeah, because I remember with McCreary, just as a quick aside, when McCreary came out, everybody said that only one corner had been taken in the last 10 years with arm length less than 29 inches, and that guy never made it. And I'm forgetting who it was now, but he didn't make it. So, as Adam knows too, and Adam, jump in, scouts and coaches, they look at this stuff. I mean, this is not, the tape is the tape. And obviously, Clark Phillips has great tape. I mean, he's a fun guy to watch. I really enjoyed watching him. But he's 5'9" with really short arms, and somewhere along the line in draft meetings, someone's going to say that that's a problem.
So some teams, guys, will, as Greg, I think you said, there's a line of demarcation. If you're this size or lower, we're not drafting. I remember Bill Polian telling me with 40 times for linebackers, might have been 4.75 or 4.7. If you were worse than that, you're off our board, like totally.
Right.
And look, some teams are doing that. So
some teams have that for corners in terms of height. Nowadays, some teams will say, hey, if you're not 6 feet or above, you're not really, you'd have to have special traits to be considered. That's the way it works, because teams don't want to get caught up. This is the old Bill Parcells theory with exceptions. You start getting too many exceptions, you don't have a team.
Yeah. Yeah. Greg, last thing on these corners, just real quick, only because we saw it last year with the rookie from New England, Jones. Why can't I think of his first name? Jones?
Jones was the rookie from either Arizona or Arizona State.
Right. I thought it was Houston. Was it not Houston that he came?
Oh, Marcus Jones. Yes.
Any of these guys have that? And I'm going to guess no, because we just talked about how tall most of these guys are. But any of them have
Jones was short.
Special teams return ability that jumped out at you? Any of these guys that we talked about?
I don't watch that, so I can't answer that.
No problem.
But it's funny. Marcus Jones, and I'm going to pull that up because I loved his tape. I didn't necessarily see him as an outside corner, but he did play there this year for New England.
Yeah. And I remember you raved about his tape last year when we did this particular show last year.
I loved his tape. Absolutely loved his tape. But let's see. He was 5'8", 174. And, I actually thought watching his tape that he could become like a Tyrann Mathieu kind of player because he played safety, he played outside corner, he played in the slot. He's just an explosive athlete. But from what I understand from talking to some people up in New England is they almost see him as an outside corner. Now, maybe he is. There's always an exception, and the exceptions make you stop and think, okay, I have to do more work now because maybe the guy, it's like Bryce Young. It's the guy is so good in so many areas, but he's probably 180 pounds. So then you have to stop and think, what does that mean? It means something. You just have to decide what it means to you.
Right. Well, he actually wound up becoming more of a Troy Brown type player, right? Because they were using him on offense by the end of the year.
At times, but not.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm kidding a little bit, but
he caught the touchdown on Thursday night against Buffalo.
Right. All right. Before we end the show, Greg, the Eagles did bring in a few guys that we haven't been able to ask you about because it hadn't happened yet. But they signed Terrell Edmunds, the safety from the Steelers, and Nick Morrow, linebacker, who had played for the Bears. I think it was, right?
Yes.
All right. We can start with Edmunds.
Yeah.
Edmunds is really a box type player, top down player. He's a short area burst player. He's got a big athletic frame. He was a first round pick. People might forget that. Doesn't really have much ball production in 5 years in the league. He's not really a post safety. He's, now can you play him there on occasion as the Steelers did on occasion? Yes, but he's not really a post safety. Can he play in the back end and cover 4? Absolutely. And I'm sure that's one thing they're thinking. He certainly can match tight ends because he's got a big body. I think he's a starting player in a system that lets him play downhill, and play in zone underneath. That's what he is. And I think, look, the Eagles knew that. The Eagles need safeties. They signed 2. They need safeties. They need competition at the position.
Right. Okay. I felt, Adam and I had this discussion. A guy who has that much starting experience, with basically a 5-year starter, but only gets a 1-year deal like that. It feels like maybe that was the league's way of saying that Terrell Edmunds has sort of reached his ceiling. He is what he is. You're not going to get anything better than what you've got. Not going to get much worse. He's just reached his ceiling.
I think, Geoff, that's 100% accurate and fair. I think he's not a bad football player. You just have to know what he is.
Right.
And what he is has certain limitations, and you have to play to maximize what he does well and minimize those limitations. I can remember a play from a few years ago, and then where he had to, I think he was matched up to a wide receiver because the team went empty and they got stuck, and he had to match up to a wide receiver and he got beat. He's a certain kind of safety. But he was a first round pick and he has 5 years of starting experience. So that not everybody has 5 years of starting experience who gets to be a free agent. And as long as you understand what he is, and like I said, because of Sean Desai and the fact that they're probably going to stick with a lot of the methodology from Jonathan Gannon, I think you'll see a lot of split safety quarters looks, and he can play in that coverage.
Okay. Good. That's what we were wondering about, if he could actually fit the quarters principle.
But having said that, there'll be some times where you're a little nervous, where if teams go in a 2-by-2 set and have a wide receiver number 2 and run vertically right at him, you'll get a little nervous. So again, he's not. The point is if he's a big time player, he doesn't hit free agency and get a 1-year deal, which is why your point's correct. Right. But he does have some positive traits for sure.
Gotcha.
So one of the guys that we talked to about Edmunds, because we talked to some pro personnel people. He said, look, he's covered slot. He's covered tight ends. He's not super comfortable with it.
Yep.
And he was a traits guy when he was drafted, but he never played that way at the NFL level. You were projecting what you thought he can do. But as you were talking about, he kind of settled into a certain type of player. He's durable, but he's just not, there's nothing special about him.
No, well, that's just what I was saying. There's going to be positives, but there's going to be some concerns, and you have to look, they know this. It's funny. Sometimes I think people don't think that teams don't know this stuff. They know everything about these guys, every single thing, but you still got to line up and play. No team's lining up with 22 all pros and Hall of Famers,
right.
So there are guys you got to line up with, and you know what? They've got some limitations. They've got some flaws in their game, and you just hope that situationally you can minimize it. And there are going to be times when you can't, and you know what? the offensive coaches in this league are pretty good too. And they'll find a way at times to match him up or to get him. Like I said, there'll be times where a wide receiver will be screaming at him with a two-way go. And you're going to go, oh, you know what? And it is what it is. It is what it is.
There you go. All right. And Nick Morrow, who I assume in this defense will sort of step into the role that Kaiser White played, assuming that Nakobe Dean sort of steps into the Edwards role.
Dean would, assuming he's the starter, would play the TJ Edwards role.
Right.
I always liked Nick Morrow. I remember watching him in Oakland when they were Oakland and saying to myself, I don't really know a lot about this guy, but this guy's a pretty good player to watch. He's very athletic because he's not a big man. I mean, there's no way he's 240. He's probably 220.
He might be 220.
Yeah. But so he looks like a safety on tape. But he moves really, really well. But he's not shy. I mean, I didn't watch every defensive game for the Bears last year, but I think he was pretty much a full-time starter, if memory serves me.
Led him in tackles, did he not?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he shows up. This guy, there you go, Adam. I did not know that that he led them in tackles.
Yeah.
Obviously, they traded Roquan Smith. That's probably the reason. But I think he's a pretty good player. And I think that, he'll step right in and he'll help the Eagles.
So Greg, I was able to talk to our friend Paul Gunther about him, who coached him. In fact, Paul said, you got to remember, he played safety in college. He didn't really know how to play linebacker when he got there. Paul got him in the second year.
Right.
He progressed so well and learned so quickly, and he really is a good kid. They wound up giving him the green dot. They wound up being that guy, the signal caller, because he can handle it.
Well, that says an awful lot, by the way.
Yeah, it does. But the one thing you mentioned, which is the salient point of all this, is he's so small. You do worry how A is going to hold up, and B, does he get washed up there a little bit because he's smaller.
Here's one reason why for the Eagles they might think that this all works, because they're a team that's going to play a ton of 5-man fronts, and in 5-man fronts, ideally you're hiding your linebackers. So in other words, you play a 5-man front, he's not going to have offensive linemen up in his face on a regular basis. Now it'll happen. You're not playing a 5-man front on every play, but they play a lot of 5-man fronts. That's a foundation, and I assume it will stay the same given who they re-signed and who they expect in Jordan Davis to play more snaps. So I think that when that happens, that allows a linebacker to move more freely. He's not going to have a 320-pound guard up in his face, and so Morrow works in the context of this scheme.
Sure. And as you mentioned, the great offensive coordinators, some of them last year were able to get that run going up the middle on the Eagles defense, and Andy Reid certainly did in the Super Bowl. But the Eagles are not changing. Clearly, these moves show that
it's not
Eagles aren't changing their philosophy. They're building.
There'll be changes that we won't know about because there'll be tweaks more than full philosophical changes,
right?
And we won't know what they are. Just because we can't know. We're not in their meetings, but they're not going to change the entire way they play defense.
Gotcha. All right. Next week, wide receivers. Looking forward to it. Going to be a great conversation. That's going to do it for this episode. I'm Geoff Mosher with Adam Caplan. And of course, joining us for the show is Greg Cosell. You've been watching The Intel with Greg Cosell.